Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good morning, and welcome to the final Camp Explore workshop of the summer, Impressionist Picnic with Bats Langley. Our sincere thanks to Bud and Roz Siegel, whose generous support makes Camp Explore possible. Thanks to the Siegels, we are able to present Camp Explore workshops, which enable children to explore a new field or hone a burgeoning skill. So at this time, please let me introduce Bats Langley, who is a painter, sculptor, writer, illustrator, toy designer, and a creator of many things. Most recently, Mr. Langley illustrated the nonfiction biography of Jacqueline Kennedy titled Jackie and the Books She Loved. It's distributed by Simon & Schuster. Mr. Langley is a Rhode Island School of Design graduate. He is a regular contributor to Spider, Ladybug Cricket and Scholastic magazines, and he has been a featured covered artist. Bats is also the creator of Gus, and his art has been shown in galleries in New York City, Los Angeles, Boston, Hartford, Providence, and Hangzhou, China, and at the New Britain Museum of American Art in the United States Capitol Building. Mr. Langley's work was exhibited at the AFA Gallery in New York City and in Vegas for many years and shown alongside of many of his idols. You'll recognize some of these names: Maurice Sendak, Tim Burton, Charles Adams, Dr. Seuss, Charles Schultz. The list goes on. Mr. Langley is the illustrator of the picture book Groggles Monster Valentine and his sequel, Groggles Monster Halloween. And he's also the author illustrated of Alice's Adventures in #Wonderland. Bats also created the cover art for Scary Stories to Tell on the Pod, a podcast hosted by a former head of Saturday Night Live writer Anna Dresden and the Miracle Workers and Best Foot Forward writer Andrew Farmer. This cover art was shown on the Late Late Show with James Corden, and Bats lives in the island of Manhattan with his husband Nick in the shadow of the Chelsea Hotel. So I'm pleased to have Bats.
And we're going to talk about Impressionism and how Impressionism sort of changed the world and how we see things. It was one of the most important movements in art, but also too in ways of seeing things. And so this piece right here, we're going to be talking about, of course, Seurat, and you probably have seen that piece. But let's begin. So cave art was one of the first, ways that we communicated. And if you can see, we have here, we have hand drawings, we have drawings of animals and such. There are some people, they're very tiny, but they're like little stick figures and such. And, our supplies at that time, when we were creating art in caves and whatnot, were things like charcoal and stones and whatnot. And, these were the creations of that time. They weren't necessarily seen from life. They were mostly, things that were remembered, animals that they had seen maybe on a hunt or, that sort of thing. So cave art, that was our first go at art, right? And so when you look at cave art and then you go to the Renaissance, that's pretty much the jump. The Renaissance was one of the first times in which artists and people were creating art that kind of looked like ourselves. We were painting, representations that resembled ourselves a little bit more. There was more, you could see more shadow, there's more three-dimensionality of things. And I can give you an example here. If you look here, this was art before the Renaissance, which was just kind of like flat and kind of lifeless. And, and then you have here the Mona Lisa, which has a lot of life. And the differences too, as you see, is that there's, shadow and a light source, and there seems to be a realism to it, right? And if you look at the medieval art, it's a little flat, it looks a little cartoony. It has, again, a representation maybe from someone's head, or also too, maybe the artist was also not very wasn't, taught in a professional way. They may have been a self-taught artist. But with Renaissance, it was a very different story. So from the time of the Renaissance, you can see, so that's 1506 was the last year of the Renaissance, to 1865. That's a lot of time. That's about, over 300, 400 years. And if you look, this was the art in Paris, France that was popular. And if you look, there's not really much of a difference, right? It kind of looks like the Renaissance, right? Kind of like the Mona Lisa, it's, has a similar shadow. Everything kind of looks realistic, right? There's not very much, there's nice things about it, but, there's a lot of things that are just very religious still, very religious paintings. Portraiture was very, direct and spot on. But so the Beaux Arts movement, they were a group of artists and that were trying to teach that, that everything had to be basically looking like this. And it's not, it's great and all, but a lot of artists were kind of like, well, I want to do something different, right? There's no, view of industrial life in Paris at the time. There's no view of the people of that time too. So you just have a lot of these representations. And so then there was Impressionism. And so the interesting thing about Impressionism is, what Impressionism is just sort of an impression of reality, of life. And some of the things that we'll go through is, we'll start off looking at some of the artists here. Now we have, so I broke everyone up today according to the artists that we'll be seeing on the screen. So here we have Monet, right? And if we look at Monet, the representation here is quick gestures. If you look at right here at, let's see. Sorry. The cursor isn't working, but I can point to it. So if you look here, if you look at Monet, there's quick gestures. A lot of these paintings that Monet did, and a lot of the paintings the Impressionists did in general, they were probably done within a day or two. And they were done very quickly, and they were done in sizes that were rather small, though some of these Monets are actually a little larger. But most of them are done very small, maybe about the size of a piece of paper. And they were done so that they had a short period of time. So for instance, like this piece right here that Monet did probably was done within a day. He knew that he had the light at a certain time of day, and he knew that he had to get it done within, 3 or 4 hours, knowing that that light was gonna disappear within that time. So, there was this quickness, this fastness. And if you look at it again, you look at Monet over here, this portrait of this woman with the umbrella, the face isn't wildly rendered. If you also look at the texture of, the fabric and everything, it's just quick and immediate. It kind of looks unfinished, right? And then you look at someone like Van Gogh, for instance, who has this quickness, but there's also this sense of like Van Gogh trying to pull out this sort of energy from either a landscape or a portrait that he was doing. And if you look, like for instance over here at Starry Night, for instance, what's really interesting about that is you see that these are just sort of interpretations of the moon, right? They're interpretations of the stars, and he's feeling out the luminosity of the moon. He's feeling out the luminosity of the stars. And also too, using these wild brushstrokes that bring energy to the piece. We look at, say again, those Beaux Art pieces. Again, there's the life in the pieces. There's life there, but there's kind of there's not a lot of energy. And now then we look over here at Seurat, and this group over here is gonna be doing some Seurat work today. And what's interesting is then you look at Seurat, and these paintings actually are very impressive and very laborious. But if you look, that's a close-up of that piece over there on the left, and you can see that each color, right, is an individual dot. And then when you stand back from the piece, all the dots come together and form the shapes. So all of these pieces here are done with individual dots. And it's truly impressive when you look at it. And we'll get into a little bit of the magic of Seurat later. And then there's Cezanne. And what's interesting about Cezanne is if you look at his work, it's really interesting, right? Like you look at it and there's all of these, you know, it's very almost cubist, right? It kind of looks like cubism. Well, he was the inventor of cubism, basically. And if you look at the piece, it's almost just like shapes, right? It's not even the actual, like if you look here, you look at this and at first, you know it's a mountain and you know it's a landscape, but it's just jagged shapes and quick gestures of color. And then let's see the last one. And then we have Matisse. I always think Matisse is interesting because it's all about color, it's all about shape, but it's almost cartoonishly, you know, looking in some way. It's almost as if we have gone back to cave art and we are drawing representations of people, right? Like these look just very much so like, you know, very quick shapes up here. So these are the artists that we're gonna talk about today, and that we broke everyone up into groups. And today what we're gonna do is we're gonna give each one of you an artist copy, and we're gonna look at that copy and try to come up with how they may have painted that, you know, how they may have painted, the kind of brush strokes they used, the light and the colors of things, and we'll get into that with each group. So at the time, some of the things that really made Impressionism, it kind of pushed that movement forward was there's a few innovations of the time. At the time, you had over here on the left, the train. At the time, artists were able to leave the city, right? They were able to leave Paris, and they were able to go into the countryside, see landscapes and places they wouldn't necessarily see in their studios. This movement was one of the first movements at the time where an artist was leaving the studio, right? A lot of times artists were, you know, working in the studio and, you know, doing these, not too far. The artists at that time, you know, before that were doing, you know, everything in the studio. These were all set up in the studio. The light was set up in the studio. The artist may have taken, I don't know, maybe some of these pieces, you know, several months to complete, right? Where again, the Impressionist pieces, they were done very quickly. And it's interesting, I pulled these pieces up of railroads because a lot of Impressionists painted the railroad system and of France at that time. And if you look, it's just like these just paintings of quick gestural marks and, you know, billowing clouds, you know, coming out of the trains and whatnot. And again, you know, the trains were really important for getting artists out of the studio and into the countryside to be able to see different colors, see different lights. You know, they were able to go to the countryside, up to the mountains, be able to go also to the ocean and to the sea. So the artists were able to, you know, venture more out of Paris. And then the other thing that's really interesting is at the time, photography just came into style. And photography was really important. It was one of the ways that people could document, you know, everyday life. And what was interesting about it, though, is if you look at these photographs, it took forever for you to take a photograph back then. Like if you were to take a picture of, say, someone sitting, you know, in a chair or whatever, it would take them about like something like, you know, 3 to 4 minutes for them to, you know, get the photograph. They would have to sit still. They would always be somewhat rigid if you look at some of the poses. But also, too, when they took photographs of everyday life, everything just seemed too real, right? And so Impressionists also felt that they needed to do paintings, you know, for the sake of making paintings, you know, survive in the art world. they had to do the paintings in a very different way, and that way was to bring more energy, more color, and more life into the pieces. And so this right here, this is a breakdown. This painting is actually really incredible. It's at the Wadsworth Atheneum up in Hartford. If you ever get to take a chance to look at it, what's incredible is, so this is a painting of Monet painting by Renoir, another Impressionist artist. And what's interesting and really cool about it is, it's sort of like all the things that made an artist be able to paint outdoors, right? So you have over here, the palette and brushes and the canvases. And a lot of times, like you see, there's very small canvases. They're not very large when these artists painted. And then they had a field easel which collapsed, right? So that easel collapsed down into this small, basically, I don't know, maybe about this tall, right? And then over here you have the painter's box, and everything was able to be put in a backpack and carried, right, to the next place they were gonna paint, or the next, journey they were gonna take on. And so at that time, there was no such thing as a field easel. There was no such thing as a lot of these things. And there was a lot of different innovations that were coming around that time, especially tubes of paint. So back then, when an artist painted, they never had tubes of paint. They had to do everything by hand in terms of mixing paints. So like, for instance, you see here, so this is how they made oil paint back then. So you had raw oils, usually from nuts and seeds, a palette knife here, and pigments. And then this is them taking the oil, putting it in with the pigments, and then mixing it up. And that's how they would do it. But that usually was put into a jar in the studio and kind of hard to carry. If you have, 12 colors that you're putting into a backpack, that's a lot of weight, that's a lot of things to carry, not necessarily easy. So at that time, artists were coming up with ways in which they could have their paints and carry them with them. So on the left is kind of gross. So those are bladders of animals that they would put paint in and then squeeze the paint out of the bladders of animals. And obviously that's really gross, and that doesn't really work for very long. And then over here, we start seeing the tubes of paint. And so this was a way in which artists were able to keep the paint fresh, keep the paint from drying, and to carry, again, they just, open it up, squeeze it onto a palette, put the cap back on, and then, able to, again, work on their, project they're working on, and then work on other paintings along the way. Some of these artists also took trips that were 3 to 4 to, a year long around, France. So, them carrying around all of their supplies, from their Paris studio, they weren't necessarily able to. And so this made things easier. Also, too, at the time, if you notice, this is a great an example of also brushes. So back at that time, a lot of the brushes were sort of soft. They were super soft. It was a way of, doing glazes, but also to, again, soft brushes are easier to make things more realistic looking. Where Hogshair brush, like Van Gogh would have used, if you notice between the two paintings, the brush strokes are very apparent. They're sort of in your face. Nothing's really blended. A lot of the paint is put right onto the canvas. And, the color just sits there on the canvas rather than where you see on the left where the paint is, again, blended and, smoothed out, and you don't see many brush strokes. And so also, too, at the time, brushes were changing, too, where you could be more aggressive with your brushes, too. So they had these things, the ferrule right here, which is the metal piece, back then, and you'll notice that on your brushes, that you have it on your brushes. But they didn't have that at that time, and they had it just like brushes with tied on with a little bit of string. And so now artists were able to get really aggressive with their mark making and be really aggressive with their paintings. And again, you can see the difference between the two here. So we're gonna get into this today, which is color theory, but I'm gonna come back to that in a little bit. But I wanna sum up a little bit about what Impressionism has done for painting. And so if you look here, you'll notice that I have Cubism, abstraction, Fauvism, Expressionism, German Expressionism, and Abstract Expressionism. Now, who here has been to an art museum before? Raise your hands. Okay, awesome, okay. So you may have seen some of these paintings before. If you've been to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, or the Metropolitan, or even at the Yale Art Gallery in close by. But you'll see that, like, what's interesting is that all of these painters here were inspired by the painters that we're going to be working with today. So that's Cubism over here with Cezanne. Cezanne sort of inspired Cubism as a movement. And you had Cubism and abstraction. And then with Fauvism, you get that with Matisse. And the German Expressionists, that also comes from the fast, quick painting marks and the texture and the gesturalness of Impressionism. So it's incredible that how much this one movement created all of this other art very quickly right after. And so we're going to talk about color theory, and I'll have this up on the screen while we work on our projects. But as you can see, so these are, again, the basic yellow, blue, red, of course, green, orange, purple, and then the, larger part of the spectrum. And so the thing that I'm going to show you today is we're not going to be using black. Now, some of the artists that you have, I will be bringing black over, like Matisse and Cezanne, but most of you won't be using black. And now the reason why is because we're going to learn how to make paintings without black, because black is, Impressionism was something that a lot of artists didn't use in their paintings, and also too, the color brown was another color in the painting that they didn't use, but they would mix other colors to create browns. And so we'll be exploring that with colors. So I think, Margaret, we're gonna start with working on passing out maybe the artist studies, and then we'll get working on that sort of thing. All right, so so Margaret is going to give everyone an artist copy to work from, and once everyone has them, we'll go from there. And I think Jenna, could you pass out pieces of paper for the students? Okay, yeah, perfect, thank you. Now, in this time, does anyone have any questions about anything? While we go through this, if you have any questions about anything, about any of the artwork, about any of the artists, please raise your hand and we can talk a little bit more about it. But today, what we're gonna do is we're gonna be doing artist studies. And what we'll be doing is working from these photographs, pick one of them, and whatever piece that inspires you or excites you. And then what we're gonna do today is we're just gonna try to copy the work. And we're gonna learn from the work, like certain painting techniques, certain ways of understanding what the artist was trying to go for. And I think that when you're looking at which one to choose, I think we only, Margaret, how long do we have today, I think, for the rest? 11:30, okay. So we have till 11:30. Okay, so we have a good hour and, we have a good hour or so. So do pick a piece that you think that will be easier to work on today.
And you can pick the same picture somebody else is working on.
Yeah. And then, hey, Jenna, could you also, Margaret, did you pass out the canvas paper too? The canvas. Oh, you did, okay, great, Fantastic. Okay, so on the regular, so you're gonna notice that there's regular paper, like this, regular, printout paper, and then there's canvas paper, okay? What you can do is, if you're confident enough to work right on, this paper here, you're more than welcome to. But something that I like to do, and I'm gonna probably do a demonstration. Great, okay. Great. So on the other pieces of paper, you might want to look at mapping out your painting. Right, so we got this paper here, right? So great. So I'm gonna look at, say, the Monet piece. And you can quickly get down just the shapes of everything to get it onto your canvas. And a lot of times artists would create a gestural sketch before they did a painting. And especially the Impressionist did pieces where it was very quick, very fast. And as you see, I'm not getting into a lot of details here, because I know that when I do my painting, and sometimes too, the artist would throw in some shade and shadow. And so here I am, I'm taking that piece, that Monet piece with the woman with the umbrella. And I know that she is backlit. There's a shadow that comes down here. This foreground shape where the meadow is gonna be here. There's the little boy in the background, right? He's in shadow. And there you go, I have it all mapped out, right? And so when you have your, sketch done, keep it off to the side and just refer to it. But you shouldn't take too long on these sketches. I would do, maybe, try to do them in like 2 minutes tops.
Can you switch back and forth between this and what's on the screen?
Oh,
Are you drawing something on your screen?
yeah, I let me see. Can we maybe go back to the PowerPoint? So there we go. So again, this is a sketch here, a very quick sketch of the woman with the umbrella, Monet's piece there on the left. And again, it's very quick, right? It's very quick, it's very gestural. And because we're gonna be spending most of the time with the colors, right? And with the, the canvas piece, which is the canvas paper here. But just work on this, just on the regular printout paper.
Can you talk about how you size it on your paper as compared to what they have?
Yeah, so if you notice that a lot of, some of the pieces might be a little bit longer, some of them might be a little shorter. So when you are mapping things out, also notice that within your printouts too, in comparison to what's here. So I think, let's see, let me come down. No, I'm just gonna come over for a sec. So, okay if I use this? Yeah, so perfect. This is a great example. Is it okay if I bring it up to the top? Thank you. Thank you very much. And what's your name, by the way? Isha. Isha, okay, excellent. So Isha did this fantastically. If we could just take a show example right here on the table. So Isha was working on Seurat's construction of the Eiffel Tower. And if you can see here, Seurat shows the unfinished part as they were about to build it. But if you see, Isha mapped it out so that she knew where the canvas stopped on her paper, right? So the sides here. So when you're doing your drawing, do make sure that you indicate the size of how you want your work to look. or the actual size of the work itself. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There you go. All right, so I'm going to give you all 2 more minutes to map things out, okay? Yeah? Okay, so you have 2 types of erasers. Let's see. Put them up here. So there's 2 types of erasers that we have. Let's see. So this is the rubber eraser, which is the white one right here. And that takes out big spots, right? And that's disappeared here. And then the kneaded eraser, which I'll get to, the packaging is very well packaged. So what's great about the kneaded eraser is it's kind of like putty, if you notice, look. So I'm trying not to get it so that it's all stringy. But what's great about the kneaded eraser is you can sort of put as much pressure onto the line. And what it does is takes out a little bit of the graphite, right? It doesn't, it's not as hard as like the rubber eraser. So if you want to, use the kneaded eraser to, just take back a little bit of the, the graphite, that will help. So yeah. So let me do one more. If we could go back to the presentation, that would be great. Okay, great. So I'm gonna do a quick drawing of Van Gogh's sunflowers. And again, all I'm doing is looking at it in terms of shape. Maybe we go back to back to the presentation part, or the drawing part. Perfect. And I'm just mapping out, realizing, okay, there's a little bit more taken off on the side. And the table hits here. Taken off on the top. All right, so I think at this point, I think everyone should be, yes, you have a question?
So are we supposed to put these lines on the final?
Okay, so yes, we'll get there, yeah. We're gonna move on right onto that. So, so when we get to the final here, so say I have this right here, right? This Van Gogh sunflowers. And I want to map it out onto here. So what I'm gonna do is, I actually will do this instead of looking at the piece, refer to the reference, but you have mapped it out already onto the paper that you have here. So for instance, the canvas paper. And so the canvas paper, which is really kind of cool, it's paper that has the texture of a canvas. It's not, on a stretcher, which is, known, everyone knows what a canvas is on a stretcher, but we'll be actually working on a canvas on a stretcher on Thursday. But today and tomorrow, we're gonna be working on canvas paper. And so if you mess up on anything or you want to, get another piece, we're able to with a canvas paper and start over. So let's see. We have, and so this is a study, and today, honestly, do not worry about getting it completely perfect. All we are doing today is just looking at the artwork, looking at the artist, and trying to understand how they did what they did and what they were trying to do. And, refer to your study and refer to your reference, because when you did your study, you kind of know what shapes you're going to be using, right? And for instance, like I'm doing this, sunflower study. I know how many sunflowers I'm going to be using.
Hey, Bats.
Yeah.
I notice when you're drawing a lot darker than I'm seeing people at the tables. Can you say something about, is there a problem drawing dark with pencil and then painting over it, or what's the issue?
So what I would do is if it's super dark, if you do super dark, and I think it's only dark here because just the way that the camera is making it, it's actually quite light here. But if it is a little dark, go use your kneaded eraser and just go over it. Because sometimes the graphite will mix with the paint a little bit. So you just want to sort of have, ironically, I'm going to say this, an impression of what your sketch is going to look like onto the canvas paper. Exactly, yeah. As Margaret said, we're gonna, if you want to lighten it up a little bit, you can. That's actually probably the best thing you can do. And again, do not try to be making this as perfect as possible. We're only using this exercise today so that it will help you with the other exercises for the next 2 days. All right, I'm gonna come over and see how everyone is doing. Oh, wow, you're already starting with the dots, aren't you? That's really cool. And everyone, just try to do it within maybe like 3 minutes because we want to make sure we have enough time to start using the paint today. Oh, this is one of my favorite paintings. Oh, awesome. So you're both doing the same painting? Yeah? Oh, very cool. Very, very cool. Oh, that's great. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Colette.
Colette. So, Colette, could you maybe work on mapping out onto this piece here? Excellent, great. We're gonna start painting soon, so excellent. But, oh, yeah, this is great. I love all the ones that everyone is choosing.
This is Rhode. Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Great. Oh, and you're both doing Starry Night, huh? That's awesome. Because if you guys have, questions or anything, you guys can ask each other about them too. Awesome, excellent. Hey, I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Read.
Reed, you know what? Reed, could you start drawing on the canvas paper? Excellent, great. Because we're gonna start painting in No, 3 minutes. But you got this. Look at how quick you got this gesture. This is really fantastic. Yeah. And you did a great job too. You really understood that it's all about shape and just understanding the shapes and whatnot. Because then the fun part, right, is the painting, right? So we'll get to that part.
More of a technique-y stuff.
We're gonna get there. Yeah. Yeah, we'll get there in a sec. Everyone is just very into their sketches.
Yes.
All right, folks, we're down to maybe about 2 minutes. I'm really stretching the minutes out, but 2 minutes, and then we're ready to start going on to doing painting. And like I said, again, these are really gestural. You see how gestural my drawing is with the sunflowers. Again, when you get to the canvas paper, you want it to be just as gestural, and also to just make it a little light too, right? Because really we want to see the paint come through, not the pencil drawing. All right, folks, are we almost done? 1 more minute. Alrighty, so pencils down, and I just need your attention for just a minute. If I could just have the presentation back on. So, as you can see, we're gonna be going up to the table over here to get paints, right? And if we look at these palettes here, these are the palettes of each of the artists that you are working on. These are some of the remnants of what was left of some of the palettes. And as you can see, what's interesting is the colors that they may have chosen. If you look at Seurat, it's very, very well planned out, right? It's very much so like it's gonna, the mixing is very prepared. And then you look at someone like Monet, it's just crazy. It looks like his paintings, doesn't it? And then you look at Van Gogh, and it kind of looks like his paintings too. The way that he uses the paint, right? Is these, big strokes, right? And that's kind of the big strokes here that he's creating. And then Matisse and then Cézanne. So when you are putting together your colors, take a look up here and see how these artists, sort of laid out some of their palettes when they've, start putting paint onto their palette and start working. So what we'll do is hey, Margaret. Oh, so sorry, Margaret. How do you want the students to go up and get paint? Should we do a line? Should we do? Whatever. Okay. All right, so why don't we do this? Why don't we have the Seurat group and the Van Gogh group come in line and get your paints? Other groups, if you want to, still plan out some of your pages, do so, and then we'll have the other.
You can use both sides of the table, gang. So you can come over on this side. Yeah. Yes, you're on this side too. Yeah.
And also too, if you think you need some more paint or whatnot, yeah, you can refill your paint. So you can come up and get some more paint and whatnot. But understand too that we only have about roughly a half an hour, maybe a little bit more. So don't take too much paint.
You can always come back and get more paint and mix it together.
And brushes are on the table, and then I think Margaret has water over there to pick up as well.
Do you want to review the brushes?
Yes, I'll definitely get to that. Because also to each artist uses a different kind of brush, right? Margaret, is there an extra packet? Oh, perfect. That's exactly what I need. Thank you.
I forgot about it.
No, it's really fun. So what you're gonna find, the Seuss group, I can have maybe just to show the demonstration camera. Oh, sorry. If I could have the demonstration camera back on again. Perfect. So the Seuss group, you're gonna notice that you're gonna be using very small, tiny brushes because you have to do pointillism, right? So you're gonna be using probably the small brushes. And in each cup, there's brushes in each cup. Now for, let's see, the Van Gogh group, you're probably gonna be using these brushes a lot, which are quick. If you notice that they are, they're a little flatter. And I think mostly, to be quite honest, I think everyone in the other groups, you're going to be using a lot of the other brushes, but Monet, Matisse, and Cezanne, you're probably gonna be using a lot of these brushes here. But also know that, you can use a lot of the other brushes, but the Seuss group, you're mostly gonna be using these brushes right here for pointillism. So we'll definitely get to that part. Monet group, why don't you go and get some paint? Margaret, could you do me a favor? Could you just get me a palette with just all the paints on it, and then that'd be great. Thank you. I'm just gonna grab one of these.
So do we use like these for mixing?
Exactly. And I'm gonna show you how to use that when I get to the top. Just gonna grab one of these. Let's see.
Watch out.
Perfect, thank you. Awesome, thank you. I'm gonna get some water too. Right. All right, so it looks like most students have their paint. Alrighty. So everyone has a palette knife, right? One of these? Yes? No, no palette knives? Okay, grab a palette knife. So I'm gonna start going through different kinds of artists that we are working with. So I'm gonna go with Seurat Group because honestly, Seurat Group, you have the hardest because it's the most time consuming. But understand that today we're just learning how to do things. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, and we're just understanding technique. Because tomorrow, we're gonna be doing still lives tomorrow, okay? And with the still lives, we're gonna be looking at an actual piece, right? And, an actual, either be a flower or a teddy bear or whatever it may be. And we're gonna look at the color and have an understanding of what the colors are that create that. And also to have an understanding of how the Impressionists would paint from that still life. Because if you notice, some of the artists that you may have do many still lives. Like for instance, I know Van Gogh does a lot of still lives, also Cezanne. And so here we have the palette knife that I was telling you about. And what's great about palette knives is what they do is you can take the palette knife, take a little bit of the color, and you can mix it, right? So I mix in a little bit of orange, right, with a little bit of yellow. That makes a little bit of a lighter orange, right? Or if I wanted to take, say, I don't know, red, and I want to mix that in with a little bit of orange, that makes a red orange, right? And so you can mix these things and add water to it, right? But don't add too much water, then you have like a watercolor. But you want to make sure you have enough water there. And so say, for instance, I'm taking a look at this Eiffel Tower here, right? And with the Seurat, now this is a Seurat, so Seurat Group, take a look at this. And you can look at the other groups, you can take a look at what I'm doing. I'll get to your artist soon, but, so Seurat would do, right, pointillism, right? And you look at it and you look at here, for instance, and you see, okay, well, there's a lot of yellow, and there's a lot of oranges, yellow, or red oranges, and right here, I'm gonna add probably some yellow orange here. And as you can see, this is just this section right here, right? That I'm doing here. And then looking at the way that he did the background, right? He probably did it with a little bit of this here. The colors are a little darker up on the screen, but you can sort of see what I'm doing here. And if you look at the Seurat too, the Seurat group that's working on, you'll notice that he uses it'll be a whole area like the sky that normally would just be blue, right? But then you see little specks of yellow in there, right? And you add those little specks of yellow because, again, when you look at it close, it's just specks or little, just dots, right? But when you pull back, it's you see the entirety of the image. The sky kind of comes together and it's not just dots. And you notice too that lines aren't just lines, they're just a bunch of dots in a row, right? And also too, this piece here, the Eiffel Tower, this is probably the Eiffel Tower, looking at the light, probably, it looks like probably a sunset where the sunset light hits the middle of the I'm sorry, not Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower. And if you notice in some of your pieces too, it's interesting how there's some other, I don't know if what pieces people have picked, but there are also some modern elements in there too. There's maybe a train in there, or again, like this piece here where it's got, the Eiffel Tower. And what I always thought was really kind of cool about this study here is, you notice the Eiffel Tower isn't completely finished. They're still working on it. And also too, look at how fast Surratt Group, look at how fast I'm working on it, right? And this here too, like for instance, this piece here is probably a study of Surratt's. So he was probably working very quickly. If you notice, it's kind of fastly done in comparison to some of his more finished pieces. All right, so that right here, folks, is the Surratt piece. And I'm gonna move on to, let's see. And do Van Gogh. So this Van Gogh here, as you can see, I'm gonna probably work on, say, this section here, maybe to show you a little bit. So I mix my colors here. I'm looking at the trees, right? And I'm also looking at kind of here with the sky here. So let's see. So Van Gogh group, take a look up here, glance up here for a moment too. Notice how Van Gogh does these sort of lines with his brushes, right? You see that he does these movements with the trees, right? And they're not just like individual leaves, right? It's the movement of what those trees in the wind are moving.
Hey, Bats.
Yeah.
Does he let things dry, or does he go wet on wet?
So here's the other thing so you are using acrylic paints, which actually dry much quicker. And Van Gogh was probably using, oil paints, yes. And so oil paint dries slower. And sometimes you can go back into oil paints. Back then they didn't have acrylic paints. They didn't have, I think, quite honestly, they may have chosen to use acrylic paints because they were working very fast. So you have the luxury of your paints drying much quicker than Van Gogh's. They didn't have them back then. Acrylics actually were like created in like maybe the 50s, 60s. And it's like plastic based, and they didn't have plastics back then.
So follow-up question. When would I want to put wet paint on top of wet paint? What does that do?
So when you have wet paint, so we'll get that probably to what Margaret was saying. We'll probably get to that with Monet and Cezanne, because Van Gogh actually probably didn't use, he used probably a lot of turpentine, which was a way to make paint dry faster. And he mostly wanted to just have marks. If you notice that his lines don't really blend, right? If you look at Van Gogh, his lines don't blend, the marks that he makes don't really blend. Again, they sort of sit on the canvas, right? So I'm doing like the ground here. And if you look at the ground, there's like little bits of green in that ground, probably from like leaves that have fallen, maybe that they're leaves the light from the trees cascade a little bit of green onto the ground. And then also too, if you look too here at that brown, he's probably using a little bit of this, maybe a little bit of red, and maybe some purple to get that bark. But if you notice, he's not using any blacks. Now he might use blacks here and there, and I'll get to that with the Matisse group, because Matisse used black, but he used it in a very specific way. And then if you look at the Van Gogh too, he's also doing some lines, but they're very quick lines. It's not just a line like this. It's, for instance, like I'm doing the bark of the tree, but Van Gogh would do a line where he was just doing, right? Those are his lines that he's creating. All right. So we have that. So Van Gogh group. And we're gonna move on to Monet. So Monet group, take a look here. Now, what's kind of great about Monet is, and it's kind of what Margaret was talking about, was there's a little bit of blending. With Monet, there's a little bit of some action to the piece. He actually probably would have used a palette knife to add paint. So what Monet would probably do is, if I'm looking at this Monet piece, Monet is probably doing, so I'm gonna do, say, this area right here, where there's a little bit of water and a little bit of this yellow meadow. So he probably did like a light wash here of the water. And these are quick, Imagine that he's painting this without photographing. There's no color photography back then. So he's the only one creating color, giving a representation of color and light there. And he has to work quickly because the sun is coming down, or maybe a storm is coming in, and he wants to make sure that he gets everything down the way that he wants to get down. Now, something that's really interesting about this time too, there were not that many female artists at the time. And you'll notice that all the artists that we have here are male. Now, there's a few female artists at the time, like Mary Cassatt and Morisot, that were artists of that time. But you have to remember, too, back then, a lot of female artists weren't trained artists. And that comes, in the 20th century, we start seeing more, these artists were working between 1800 to about 1950. Matisse died in the 1950s. So, these artists really, pushed the boundaries in terms of, movements and whatnot, but then female trained artists came into certain art scenes at different times. So then right here, so I bet, he let some of this dry, or, I'm gonna go into the ocean right here, right? And so he's doing these quick marks, right? To show the movement of the water. And these are quick, and look at right here too that I'm doing. I'm doing big gobs of paint here, because Monet would have big gobs of paint. And if you ever get to see a Monet painting in real life, in any of these paintings, you'll notice that there's just gobs of paint, because they're working very quickly, and they know that whatever movement they do to a piece, whatever brush stroke, whatever gob of color or whatever, is a representation of what they're seeing in front of them. And so if you look over here in the meadow right here, he's got gobs of, it's like, sometimes when you get really close to some of these paintings, they are really just like, they look like, again, what I was showing you before, their palettes. It looks just like their palettes, where you just have these gobs and gobs of paint. And he's just working real quick. He's seeing specks. It's almost as if you're looking at a lot of these paintings as if you have your glasses off and everything's kind of fuzzy. And you're only seeing the light up there. And you're only seeing the color. As you can see, like, he's got, just gobs and gobs of color and light. And then right here, I'm gonna do, I don't know, say I wanna bring in some of that green. He'll bring in some of that green in there. And if you notice, I'm painting over the gobs of paint too and blending and mixing it in. A lot of times they used to, so painters, when they would mix things, they would only mix things on the palette, right? And then they would bring it onto the painting and then they would blend in all the paint, right? But if you look at some of the paintings themselves, they kind of resemble their palette because they're actually sometimes moving the color onto the canvas. All right, so Monet group. All right, so I'm gonna move on to another style. Yeah.
An undercoat underneath, and then do the dot top.
So, like, for instance, with this
Wait, let's repeat the question.
Oh, yes, so sorry.
Thank you.
So the question that was being asked, I apologize. The question that was being asked was there an undercoat to Seurat? Was it all just dots? In some of his paintings, like this painting here, is what I would say a study. So what he would probably do, and if you look really close, he probably did a very quick brush, like a light blue wash on this. But that's probably like because it was the predominant color of that piece, right? And then, then he did the dots on top of that.
Didn't do the dots in rows, or did he just do them random?
No, so he did them in rows. So like this piece here, where did I put? There we go. So if you look at this one here, he would do them, he would do them, like, so for instance, instead of doing like a straight line, right? So Seurat would he would do them in rows like that to create a line, right? Or for instance, he would do, if I was doing a circle, I normally would paint like that, right? A circle, but then Seurat would do, and then he would probably go in and make it even more complicated by making, then he would put like, what's the second color next to it? He would bring in orange, right? And so.
So Bats, it's kind of like you're saying if he needs some sort of structure in the painting, he does it in the line. Otherwise, more freeform.
Exactly. So Seurat would probably, again, if he was making a circle, for instance, right? If he was making an apple, we're just gonna make this an apple. He would go in and he would map it out with dots, basically. So he would map it out, like here's the top, So here's the apple here. He would, he would make, say, the stem. He would go in and he would come in with dots, right? And then he makes this outline here. And then, apples are orangey red. Some apples are. And then he would go back in, and then to do a shadow, he'd bring in like maybe some purple, right? And he would bring in some purple over to those dots. And I always found what was interesting about Seurat is that if you look, a lot of times he would start a structure, he would get down get down a color. So for instance, like the Eiffel Tower, he would get down like all of, he would work from light to dark kind of sometimes. So you would see like he got all the oranges done on like this part here of the Eiffel Tower, right? And then there are these parts here where, there's obvious shadow. So then he would go on top of that with a darker color. Like I see that as mostly, like that's like a reddish, purplish kind of thing. And then he would go in and add those here, right?
I'm going to interrupt. We have 9 minutes left.
9
in
minutes
today's
left,
session,
okay.
and we still haven't addressed the Matisse
Okay.
or Cezanne.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to do that tomorrow, and if you want to mention anything about still life objects.
Okay, yes. So I'm gonna do something really quick on the Cezannes, and I'm gonna do something really quick on the Matisses. So Cezanne, we were talking about before with Seurat, was there maybe a base color or something? So for instance, we're gonna do one of these fruits here. So I'm gonna do a circle here, right? And he would do with a much fatter brush here, or thicker brush, he would add the color here. Then he would bring in and put some more like the yellows in. And then if you notice here, what would he do with the shadow? So he would bring in something that brings the shadow. And his brush work really was like this. It was very, used a bigger, thicker brush. And it was almost like he was sculpting a lot of times. If you look at Cezanne pieces, they were almost sculptural in a lot of ways. So for instance, like so here with this fruit here. Margaret, when we have 3 minutes left, I'll talk to the students about what they need to bring in for tomorrow. All right, so that's Cezanne. And again, notice that, Cezanne would do these, again, he would probably use a brush like this. And it's just, very quick, almost like Van Gogh in a lot of ways, but he's a little bit more blended. He would do those marks and then probably paint over a little bit on them like this right here. Because if you notice, with the peaches here, they're a little more blended. Okay, and then our last one is Matisse, which I don't have a Matisse up here, but Margaret, could you grab me a Matisse? Thank you.
Oh, yes, but just.
Yes.
So some of the Chinese about something about Monet's paintings is they're very like stiff. They're not really like active. They're still.
Monet's paintings are very still.
Oh yeah, they have they have a movement to them, but you're right. They don't have like the action of say like a Van Gogh piece, right? Where it's very, very actiony. And that's what's kind of interesting, right? Like when you look at all these painters, they all have there's a stillness, yeah. There's almost a meditative quality to Monet, right? 4 minutes, okay. So, but that's a very good point of bringing up. Because if you notice how all these artists have all these different styles and ways of painting, right? They're not all the same, but at the same time, they themselves are under the same movement. So if you look here at the Matisse work, if you notice that a lot of Matisse work, it's big, quick shapes, right? And so he would do, very quick shapes. And here with this like leaf here, he would go in with his, the back of his brush, right? And he would go in there like that and scrape some of the paint off. If you look at like right here which I think is really kind of cool. Like, this is not the color, but, you know, he would paint this down here, like so, like the chair here. And then he would go in and put, like, scrape out, it looks like X's and O's in the chair, right? And he would do that like that. And so he was also doing these very interesting little techniques of scraping things away. And these are things that we can learn tomorrow when we're working with a still life. Now, the still life tomorrow, we're gonna do still lives, and we're gonna be breaking everyone up into groups. And tomorrow, what I would like you to do is everyone bring in something, either it be a toy, a teddy bear, it could be a plant, it could be something that you're able to bring in tomorrow. And we're gonna construct a still life with all of these objects that you bring in tomorrow, okay? So remember to bring in tomorrow an object of some sort that we can paint from. I would say try to paint from something that's really colorful, okay? Because we wanna use a lot of color tomorrow, and try to stay away from things that are, I would say black and brown things. Try to find things that have lots and lots of color in it, okay? So remember tomorrow to bring in something, okay?
I don't have it. I would like to just give everybody 2 minutes to finish up, and then we will be cleaning up. We would like to start on time tomorrow, right at 10. So if you want to talk to anybody who's driving you, take a little extra time. The roads have been crazy this summer. But thank you, Bats. Come in with your questions too, and we can start off tomorrow with a little discussion of what you felt you understood about today, what you would like clarified, and we'll move forward from there. Thank you all.
Yes, and then also too tomorrow, maybe we can take what we have worked on today and we could spread it out and just to take a look at some of the techniques everyone was working on. Because I think that what's really interesting is maybe we may have not made the exact techniques on the artists, but we can take some techniques from some of the stuff that we were looking at today. I can take probably one question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So here's the thing. So with browns, what's really interesting is, so for instance, so you have your lighter colors here. Here's the best way I say to do brown, is take a little bit of red, and then you mix it in with blue. Now, I don't necessarily have the right blue, but you kind of make a purple. And then what I usually sometimes use is either a yellow, and then there's this other color here called yellow ochre, right? And so I'm gonna use yellow. And I've got this red, and I've got this purple. And I'm gonna mix it around. And here's the thing that's really interesting is when you look at browns, if you look at this brown, it might not show up necessarily as well. But if you look at this brown here, it's a reddish brown. And maybe the brown that I want to use is a little bit more bluer, right? So what I would do is probably bring in some more blue. And that's a bluish brown. And so what you do a lot of times is a lot of the artists in the Impressionist movement, they really try to use kind of a limited palette. And we pretty much have like a palette that was very similar in terms of paints that they would use, but they really tried to mix their own colors. Because the thing that was interesting about when you go and look at things in real life, you notice that the colors out there aren't necessarily what you see in the tube, right? Sometimes those colors are completely different. And then it's also too, sometimes those colors also depend on the light color, right? Some lights are a little warmer, some are a little bit bluer.
Good morning and welcome to the second day of our Impressionist picnic with Bats Langley. I am happy you're all back. Want to let you know that you are not assigned seats. Find a place and a perspective that you want to draw something or paint something and settle yourself there. You are not confined to one table. You can finish your artwork and move to another one. So also, you are learning techniques from Impressionist movement and thinking, now what? Well, we can help. The Westport Library Impressionist art resource is beyond books and events, and that is our museum passes. So here are a few that you can borrow from the library for free and take a trip to see some of the artists' works that you have been examining with bats. And you can see in person. You can go to the Bruce Museum in Greenwich, the Florence Griswold Museum in Old Lyme, the Guggenheim in New York City, the Aldrich Contemporary Museum in Ridgefield, Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, and there was one of the pieces on the slide that is actually on display there. The Met, Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Westport. So I'm going to turn it over to Bats for a little bit of a review and techniques and discussion, and then you are off and painting. Thank you.
All right, so everyone can hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. So today we're gonna be working on a still life today, and a lot of you brought some really great items, I can see. And I'm gonna be up here today doing some techniques and such, so you can always come up here and look up here on the screen to see what I'm doing. But work from your still lives, and we'll begin. So with the still lives, I know yesterday we did like quick sketches. If you want to do a quick sketch of exactly your composition, you can do that. If you want to work right on to your canvas paper, you're more than welcome to do that too. But one of the things that I always do when I'm trying to look at a setup, for instance, because sometimes these setups can be a little bit, it could be a little bit, a lot, in terms of trying to figure out exactly what you're, want to be painting. So what I always do is I do a thing called a square system, right? So you can make your hand like a square, right? See, like this, and then I could go like this, and I can turn, I can make the borders shorter, or, and I can go like this and sort of see what exactly I might want to be doing. So I'm looking from here, and I'm probably going to be doing this still life from here, right? So let's see. Now, it's probably upside down, but I'll turn it right side up. So I'm looking at this still life, and I'm getting down exactly a quick gesture of what I'm looking at. And I'm gonna be adding the bench here, and then, okay, well, what that fold is gonna be looking like. Okay. And the flowers come out a little bit more. And also too, while you're setting up of what you're gonna be painting, also remember too, there's ways that you could take things out of your piece as well. So for instance, in this setup here, I might not wanna add the skull with the crown, or I might want to add the skull with the crown. It's up to you, but you have the decision what to add and what not to add in your pieces. And also too, when you're doing setups too, if you're looking at, for instance, the, there's certain boxes that you all have, and there's the books and that sort of thing. Take your pencil and put it like this and see what those, put it to the side and see what that angle is gonna be like. So then I look at here and I go, oh wow, you know what, actually, this angle is better this way, right? And I check that out there. Change my angles a little bit. And again, these are just very quick sketches. All right, now I'm gonna go right to doing work on the canvas paper. Now, I think that some of you have the kneaded erasers with you. And just remember, what's great about the kneaded eraser is that if you go a little too dark on the graphite pencil, you can go in and dab it a little bit and make sure that the graphite doesn't mix with the paint. And see how fast I'm working again on this sketch? It does not have to be laborious, and it's actually interesting. The faster you work out what that sketch is gonna be, it actually, the piece looks a lot better in terms of kind of getting everything exact. Now, if you feel that you are done with a setup and a piece and you want to do something else, you can do that as well. You can move to another station if you want, but try to do an entire piece today, just so that you have an entire piece done, but also to, make sure that when you're painting, get the entire piece full of paint. Make sure that there's no parts of the canvas that you can see, okay? All right, so I'm gonna do a really quick demonstration about putting paint down when it comes to, oh wait, I'm sorry, this was backwards. So here is, what I'm gonna be painting today, which is the setup over here. And so someone talked about, I'm so sorry, I forgot your name, in the purple. Yes, yes. Yes, you were talking about yesterday about what kind of base coat some of the artists might have used. And so, for instance, you might look and say, okay, in this piece here, even though I don't have a necessarily background color, I want to maybe do that pinkish, right? So a lot of times what they would do is they would put down a ground like so, right? And they would do that very quick. So for instance, with this piece here that I'm working on, I'm going to map out all of my color. I'm going to make that a pink background. And again, you can do it any color background you would want to, but see how it corresponds to the colors that are in front of you. Like for instance, there's those those pinkish kind of rose-colored colors over in the back row over there. You may want to put a blue background that have a little contrast. Over there with I think it's the orchid and the piano, you look at that and you say, what colors will pop out, the colors in front of you. You may want to do a blue background, it's up to you. So think about what your background is going to be. And do it really, really light, because what you're gonna do, and also too, if you have too much paint, make sure you use your paper towel.
So that,
Yeah.
so that's, I'm noticing that you aren't necessarily doing everything that's on the display.
Exactly.
So, everybody has the option to just paint part of what they see.
They can
not
paint-
everything that's on the display.
Exactly, but try to paint more than 3 things, okay? So for instance, in this piece right here, I might not necessarily want to do the skull, and maybe I might not necessarily want to do the other flower piece, but I actually might want to do that flower piece. But do, the bench, for instance, I'm doing the bench, the flowers, and the fabric. But try to do more than 3 items. Try not to do one singular item. And make sure that you're adding some background. Make sure you're adding some, what it's sitting on. We don't want any pieces floating in space. and we want to make sure that there's, everything is sort of sitting down on something, okay? Now, while we're doing this today, if anyone has any questions about anything, let me know. Raise your hand. Now, I want to go through kind of some of the stuff that we were working on yesterday because there were some really, really interesting pieces. And why I brought these to attention was because they weren't necessarily pieces that were per se exact representations of some of what we were working on, but some of you really found some really incredible techniques. So this one right here, which is really wonderful, I think this was in the Monet group. And what's really incredible was I was watching whoever was making this using some palette knives, which is really, really wonderful. And then look at all of these wonderful techniques here where the person was taking their brush, and I'm not gonna put it on this piece here, but I'm gonna show the movement. But the movement was kind of like this, right? And you have all of this wonderful brush work here, and then there's all of a sudden this gestural work right here, right? These gestural, squiggles and lines and stuff. Also use the back of your brush too. So for instance, let's see, a piece of paper. So if you wanted to take the back of your brush right here, and what's kind of fun about this is, maybe do a thinner brush here. You might want to do some lines here like this with the back of your brush, which it doesn't have any bristles, right? And you get these kind of cool effects here like that. And those are great for too if you're doing like, I don't know, if you wanted to do like lines on a fabric, but didn't want to make them exactly lines, they kind of work that way too. You could do these as, reeds in, or grass, for instance, in a field even. But see how that kind of like, just the way that the paint kind of is applied there. It isn't necessarily one perfectly crisp line. There's a little bit of action to it, right? So that's one way of looking. So again, this piece here is really wonderful. There's a lot of really incredible mark making and some really cool effects going on here. And also too, which is great about this piece too, I want to add too, is if you look here too, is the washes, right? We have this light wash, this very, very, if you've used watercolor before, it's very, very light wash. And then they use opaque paint. And when I say opaque, it's using basically paint with no water down, nothing is watered down. So for instance, let's do, perfect. So for instance, right here, when I did this here, this is kind of, a watered down paint right here, right? Very thin wash. And then if I use just opaque paint here, see how that just sits on top of that? And so it's, it's almost right from the tube kind of paint. And again, mix your paints too. Don't necessarily take them right from the tube. And this, let's see here. We have, so this Cezanne piece, which is really interesting. The artist that was working on this yesterday, what's really interesting too is look at all the wonderful washes too. Again, all these wonderful brush strokes where it's a mix of, it's almost as if they were mixing that paint color right onto the piece, right? And then also too, all of these smudgy pieces, smudgy marks here. And then look at all these kind of marks going on up here where they were starting to work on the mountain here. And so if you look at this, it looks as if they hadn't used the same brush on the entire piece. That's something too, when you're working on these pieces, try your best to use different brushes. Because different brushes, they have different ways of making marks. So obviously, a smaller brush is gonna make smaller marks, right? And then the bigger brush, of course, makes bigger marks. But also too, play around with, like, so for instance, like this is a flat brush right here, right? And so with a flat brush, what's really fun about too is with a flat brush, I can use the side here and make lines. And then also too, I can take it and make a mark like that. So, you know, play with your brushes too. If you have a piece of paper on the side, play with that piece of paper before you even put the paint down on the paper. You might want to, you know, see what that mark looks like before you even start doing anything. And like also too, you know, also think about when you put down some wet paint, right? And you add a little bit of, I don't know, say orange, and like blend that in and see what that looks like. So always too, like when I'm painting myself and I'm working on a painting, I have always a piece of paper or a bunch of, pieces of white paper, and I'm always putting, you know, marks and seeing what that mark is gonna look like, how that's gonna look like on a canvas, because I might not be sure what that's gonna look like. Now here's another piece. Someone did the Matisse piece, and what's really great too about this here is they made their own brown, which is really wonderful. But as they made their own brown, you can see too, is that they kind of worked their brush into the piece. So for instance, when they did this here, they did a wet wash. Right? And then, as I was saying to you before, they added color while it was still wet. So here we have a little bit of an ombre effect going on here, where we have this blue entering this kind of purpley here. But you can do that too. And then also to make sure that, you know, we were talking yesterday about some of the paintings. Let's take a look. Let's see. If I could just get the slide on, I can talk about some of those. So I'm gonna go with a little bit of the Monet right here. And like, if you look again with Monet and then look also, all right, how do we do this? Maybe we could do a flip here for just a second onto the demonstration. Okay, great. So when we were looking at, say, like some of the backgrounds of Monet that Monet was doing, and then we take a look over here, again, we still see some mark making happening here. Try not to smooth that out. We want to see the marks. We want to see all the brush strokes. Oh, we have a question. Okay, in the back. Yeah. So with a fabric like that, I would take a look at your purples and your pinks, and also now there's white added to your palettes today. And with the white, you know, I kind of go, the white sometimes can make your colors very opaque looking. So you utilize the white when you want, you know, try to maybe to water down the color a little bit, but the white too, so I'll show you an example too. So you were talking about the color of that. Yeah. Okay. I think there's like a pink, so like this pink here, I would maybe try to use some of that pink. And I'm doing this from the distance, so let's see, and I might, and again, you can always test things out. So right here, I used this pink here. Again, the colors are a little weird on the screen, but use this pink here, and I would use maybe some of this right here. And I would paint with a little bit of that there. And then when you're doing a shadow, I would probably go in more with whatever that blue is. And let's see, maybe that might need to dry a little bit. But you can add a little bit of that blue. Oh, and then you can add a little bit of that pink.
So Bat, what I'm seeing is you are just playing with it and
Yeah.
trying to create something. And
Absolutely.
Impressionism is your impression of the color, not
Yep.
the Renaissance paintings and the earlier paintings of the realistic.
No, and like if we look back at the slide for one sec, I would want to just show you quickly. Okay. So see with the Mona Lisa, for instance, a lot of that is brown, is actually brown. Most of that painting is brown. And you actually don't have brown on your palettes because I took that out. But the reason why is because back then they would probably prime, like I was showing you what the background color of everything would be. It would probably be like a brown color, and then they would lay paint on top of that color, and they would use, more opaque paints. There were light washes in, say, the Mona Lisa, but really, it's all about form, right? It's all about making it sculptural, making it seem like the Mona Lisa is something that you could put your arm inside and you were able to maybe touch her or touch the background or whatever it may be. It's an illusion, basically. And when it comes to Impressionism, there's illusions going on, but if you look at a lot of the paintings, you'll notice that there aren't any blacks per se, or there aren't any browns in there. And if there are browns, they're being created by the colors themselves. So, it's not coming from the tube, right? It's not just brown from the tube. And if there are blacks, it's actually very, very dark blues, or very dark purples, or very dark greens. And now some artists, though, like Matisse, actually use black, but we'll get to that at some point later on. But that's a that's a jumping point we'll get to. But a lot of the artists actually never used any blacks in their piece, the Impressionist artists. And again, it was because they wanted the viewer to really see the colors of things. They really wanted the viewer to have an understanding that they know that this, the artist knows that the viewer knows that this is a painting, right? That what they're experiencing in front of them is not reality or trying to be reality. Now, to go through, I'm just gonna go back to some of the stuff that we did on the, so if we could just shoot on the presentation table. Great, thank you so much. So as we can see here, this other artist yesterday did this great version of Starry Night, and what's really incredible too is just also notice how this artist has mapped out everything. And what's really kind of incredible too is how this artist also too really observed everywhere the paint was going to go, which is really kind of a really incredible and interesting way to map things out. But yet, look at how gestural everything is. Look at how quick those brush marks are made. And also to notice that the artist mixes a little bit of the green in there. And there's, it's not just blue, it's not just yellow. There's some oranges in there, there's some blues in there, there's some greens in there. Because, when you really observe color and look at color, a lot of the times it's all dependent on light, right? The way that light hits things changes the color. Now this was I love this little piece here because the artist was looking at, I believe, a Monet piece. And what's really wonderful about this piece too is it's all about just mapping out what the color is, right? And I kind of know what this piece is based on what the painting that they were referring to. But in some ways, I don't even need to know what this piece actually looks like, because if you look here, what's really incredible is all the different ranges of mark making here. There's some mixing here on the canvas right here. There's also this dry brush technique, which is really wonderful that this person did. For instance, so what you do is make sure that you have a very dry brush, literally dry brush. And let's use some purple here. And sometimes what I do is I'll take, a piece of, again, paper towel and just take some of the excess off and use the grain of the canvas, right? You have that wonderful texture, right, on the canvas, right? And you lightly brush up against that, right? And you can get some really fun dry brush technique. And look at how interesting that is, right? That you can use the textures of the canvas. And you just do light strokes. And you can do some really cool build-ups. So when you're observing your piece, again, remember the lines that we were working on yesterday. Notice that here's a really great piece too that was done yesterday. And what was really fun about this piece was, even though they were at the Seuss table and everyone was really, concentrating on doing all the pointillism and whatnot, this artist really got in there and really played around with like all the different techniques that we were talking about yesterday. And so there's some parts here where they are taking their palette knife, and let's do a little demonstration. So they're taking their palette knife and they're going in, and it's almost like you're buttering bread, right? You get in there, and then they're taking their butter knife. They're taking their palette knife and they're scraping in there, right? And look at all these really cool marks you can make too. I mean, Van Gogh did this a lot of times with palette knives, and Matisse did this a lot with his work. But, and then what's really interesting too about that, and I'm gonna show you in a little bit, I'm gonna let this dry, and then there's also some really cool things you can do with this as well, where you can add colors on top. So what I'm gonna do with this here is I'm gonna let this dry here, and then I'll show you a little technique in a little bit when I'm done letting that dry. But using the palette knife. But also too, when you're using your palette knife too, you can also for instance, I'm looking at, so to go back to the piece that I am looking at and observing, so that's got a little bit of red. Okay, got some red in there. And a little bit of purple in there. All right, and that's pretty much what that bench looks like there. And you know what, I kind of want to just kind of be thick with it, right? And just kind of go in. And also too, I'm gonna use some of the edges here. And so when this, piece dries, you're gonna have a texture on this piece that's gonna be really, really wonderful. Or not, because sometimes you make mistakes. But what's really kind of wonderful too about these paintings is when they're dry, you can go right over them. You can go right over them. And sometimes what I'll do too is if I'm working on a piece that I'm not very happy with, let's take a look here. So like for instance, if there is, I don't know, let's say I didn't want this purple here, make sure you take your white paint and then just go right over it. Let that area dry, and then you can go and paint right over that when it's done and ready and dry. So, there are mistakes in painting. Nothing's perfect. But if you notice that you want to take something out or remove it, just paint right over it. Now, a lot of times there are painters who just strictly paint with palette knives. And of course, it makes a really incredible technique because it really is kind of like throwing the palette right onto the canvas. So in about, I would say, let's see what time we've got. So in about 5 minutes, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come down and see how everyone is doing. And if you have any individual questions or anything, I will come to you and we can chat about them. And also too, if you have questions about the pieces that you're working on specifically or what kind of colors to use. Now here's something that I also do too, and I'm being very loose here with my piece, but one thing too is when you have a color, so if I'm mixing like this color here, I might add a little white because honestly, I look at the drapery that I'm painting from, and it has, I would say a little bit of yellow, a little bit of ochre, a little bit of orange, and I add some white there because it's kind of a creamier color. And so if you want to add white, use it, you definitely use the white. But again, it's gonna make it very opaque. So if you see here, that's very opaque paint. And that's perfectly fine. The artists like Van Gogh painted in very opaque paints. So I'm not allowing myself to let the paint dry that much, but as you can see, all right. And now, if you look at your cloth too, you say to yourself, okay, I want to add some shadow there. I might want to lighten up some areas. So when you have like this color right here, so for instance, this is your base color for the drapery that I'm painting from. Do one side here that's a little lighter. So we're gonna add some white, some yellow, And then on this side, here, you kind of want to do a spectrum. So it's kind of like what we were showing yesterday with the artist palettes. So let's see, I'm probably going to do a little bit of purple on that. So as you can see, there's a spectrum here from light to dark of what that drapery is going to be. I'm going to let this dry a little bit because honestly, like if I add anything to it, it's just going to fall apart for me. But, you know, the other thing too is when you're working on a painting, try to work on most of the painting, laying things down, because you can always go back into it. Now, when the artist did a lot of these works, you have to remember there was no electricity back then. So that the light was actually all natural light coming in from a window, or maybe from a candle light, or from, oh, bless you. So there was all different kinds of light that was coming in, but there was no electric light. So remember that when the light during the day, it changes throughout the day, right? When you think about light during, say, the morning, right? The morning light, it's got that golden look, a lot of yellows, and then throughout the day, it gets a little bit bluer. Around noon, when the sun is right overhead, the colors are very, very blue and vivid. And then towards the end of the day, the colors change again, right? They get to that sunsetty color, right? So think about too, when you're painting, the colors change depending on the day. If you look out today, out the window and see the colors out there, it seems really gray, right? Well, when you look at the trees and everything, notice that if it was a sunnier day, the leaves in the tree would be more, the green would have yellows through it, right? And then today, because of the cloudiness, notice that the trees have a lot of blue in them, right? They're a lot cooler. All right, I'm gonna come down and see what you guys are all working on. From up here, it's really wonderful. I'm seeing a lot of cool stuff. Oop. Got a mic drop. Let's see, wait. Oh, very nice. Now, when you're working on this here, I would say try to think about the background a little bit and get the background just a little bit in now, because it's gonna be harder when you're doing all the fine details. But this is really wonderful. I love the setup, and the way that you designed it is really, really cool. Very, very cool. Oh, cool. Did you paint that yourself? Mm-hmm. Did you paint that piece yourself?
No, that's how that was made.
Oh, very cool.
I'm gonna try and make it similar to that color.
Oh, yeah. You know what? If you want, I can show you how to do that. But yeah, I thought when you brought that in, I saw it and I was like, oh, that's really, really cool because it has a really cool effect on that. That's very, very cool.
Yeah, the name of that is like tie-dye.
Oh, yep. Very, very nice. Yeah, so I'm looking around and I'm noticing also too that people are doing just the individual pieces. There are a lot of floating pieces. So if you could try to put in some of the background or some of the ground, like I know some of it is on the white paper. If you want to try to put down a color that you think that might look great underneath the piece. Ooh, very nice. I like that you're inspired by all the different flowers and stuff in front. Oh, wow. That is really great. Love all the different techniques that you're using, and that's really great. I love it. And also, too, I noticed, too, it's like, it's okay if I hold it up? Okay. Thank you so much. You know what, I'm probably gonna bring it up to the top, but you're doing really great. I'll be right back. So this artist, Aura, her piece, so here's Aura's piece currently. It's still in the works. But if you notice, Aura is thinking about the entire background. She's thinking about what that vase is gonna be sitting on and what kind of mark making that she's gonna continue doing. You know, it's really well planned out, this piece. So try to get your pieces about this level shortly. Maybe try to get them done in the next 3 minutes to this level in terms of mapping things out. Because like I said, this vase isn't floating in midair, it's sitting on the bench. Also too, that there's a background going on. And I'm not sure what the artist is gonna continue doing, but there might be more of a, you know, more of a sort of, you know, bottom background where this bench is sitting on. But this is a very, very good start. Here you go. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me share that. Hi, guys. Oh, that's great. So yeah, this is really wonderful, you playing around with the colors and testing some stuff out. That's wonderful. Oh, so this is great. This is really, really great because you're mixing your colors and you got the whole thing down. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
So okay if I bring this up?
Of course.
Okay, great. So I'll bring this up in a sec. So we were talking about before about some of the color mixing, right, on just an extra piece of paper. If you noticed this, you know, this artist here was just trying to test out different blues and seeing how it would relate to the purples. And so this is really, really lovely and seeing the different, you know, technique here. But again, this is just their sample piece. And again, you know, they're testing things out. What would it look like if I added some white to that green? And also too, you know, using the different purples with the blues. So again, definitely test some things out on another piece of paper. Because it's interesting what you can do with it. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me share. Here you go. Oh, wonderful. Everyone is getting some background in. Oh, this is great. Oh, wonderful. This is great. Is it okay if I bring this up to the front to show everyone? Okay, great. Thank you for letting me share this. So this piece is really kind of fun here. Look at these wonderful effects that are going on here in the teddy bear. You know, this person didn't sit there and render every hair on the teddy bear or whatnot. They used stippling of their brush. They used different marks, you know, for different materials here, for the fabric. So, you know, when you're creating these, think about what you're seeing in front of you. What kind of texture are you gonna use for glass? What kind of texture are you gonna use for fur on a stuffed animal? Thank you so much for letting me share this. This is very cool. All right. So everyone is really coming along with this. These are really great. Oh, wow. That's fabulous. I'm gonna come back and show your piece when you're a little further along the line.
Okay.
Yeah, I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Of course, I realized that I drew this all on the non-canvas side.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what, that's a little, it's not as coarse, you know?
Yeah.
So it still works.
But I was already, you know, like deep into painting with canvas, and this doesn't have that texture.
Well, this artist here, folks, they use the other side of the canvas paper, which is a little bit smoother and not necessarily as coarse. So if that is something you want to do for another piece, use the other side. You're more than welcome to as well. But it's all up to you.
I have a bunch of relatives who are artists, and we have, you know, paintings that they kind of started, and they have them on both sides. Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There are a lot of painters who, you know, for instance, Van Gogh, a lot of times, he may have not had a lot of money at the time and able to buy new stretch canvases, or was able, you know, wasn't able to, oh, hi.
Hi. If you're done, could you go to a different table?
Yeah, you get another piece of paper and you can go right to another table. And you know what, if your piece is done, just put it right on that table there, over there to let it dry. And yeah, perfect. And also too, if you want to, you could take it with you, you know, as it inspires you for another piece. And also too, if you have, you know, if your water is a little dirty and you need more water, you know, fresh water, come up to the table and we can get you some new water. Because some.
Did you ever see the movie of 6 Degrees of Separation? Where
A
they had
long
the
time ago.
that was
Yes,
inside
because
chaos control, you like?
well, I was saying it was like Van Gogh, for instance. You know, there were times where Van Gogh didn't have a lot of pieces of paper, or you know, he might have been on a journey where he was unable to get paper or to get canvases, and so sometimes he would either paint over a painting that he felt was less successful, and sometimes he would draw on the other side of things. I think there's I'm not sure, I believe the Metropolitan or it's the Harvard Art Museum has a double-sided Van Gogh painting where it's a double-sided self-portrait.
Well,
And
what's interesting is with all the new technology, underneath, they can see what's underneath
Yeah.
the paint.
oh, exactly, yeah.
Mona Lisa, they're like 6 different paintings.
Yeah. And also remember too, when a lot of these artists were painting on, you know, from life, they may have brought one canvas with them. They started painting something and realized, I don't really like to paint this anymore. I'm gonna paint, you know, this other side of the meadow. And sometimes they would just repaint over the painting or scrape off the oil paint and then start all over again. Also to, use, some people I'm seeing are actually using their paper towels as a way to get some texture onto their pieces. Oh, wow. That's so cool. Yeah, this is so very, very cool. It's really fun. The pieces that I feel everyone is sort of really progressing with are the ones that utilize a lot of different techniques. They're not using just one brush to paint. They're using multiple brushes, multiple mark making. And also to remember the artist that you were working with yesterday. You might want to add some of those things, those elements and techniques you were working on yesterday. This is coming along really great. Very, very cool.
Illustrator Jerry Pinkney, who does watercolors.
Yes.
But he leaves the lines underneath so you can see through it.
Yeah, I love his work. And they're mostly all watercolor pieces.
Yep.
Now also too, if you're done with a piece and you feel that you're done with a piece, really listen to yourself and say, okay, I'm done with that piece. And then maybe if you want to, work on another piece and maybe another setup, but don't feel that you have to work on the piece that you're working with.
Because we have 20 more minutes.
Okay?
We'll stop at 20 after so they can have time to clean up.
Okay, yeah. So maybe actually right now, if you're feeling you're done with a piece at a moment and you want to work on and starting working on another piece, I would probably start now. But if you're really happy with what you're working on, definitely still work on that piece. Now I'm going to do some demonstrations up here, some more painting demonstrations for you to see. So I think I was showing you before with a palette knife, and you get these really cool marks right here, right? Where you've got like this scraping here on the canvas. And then what you could kind of do too is you can kind of go over those areas, maybe with a little yellow. And see how interesting that kind of looks like, almost as if, it's sunlight coming through a leaf of some sort, right? So instead of having just the white or a sort of washed out version of a color, you can kind of add a color to it as well. Now tomorrow we're going to be doing landscape paintings, and we're going to be going outside possibly. It depends on the weather tomorrow, but I think we're going to be able to do it. But we'll check again. But tomorrow you're going to be working on actual stretched canvas, right? As you probably know what that looks like, but it's like the canvas paper, but it's got wooden bars all the way around it. It's like a drum, right? And you'll paint right on top of that. And what's really going to be fun tomorrow is you're going to be able to look at the environment a little bit and see sort of how light changes a landscape, right? You'll be able to look at the landscape, be able to search for colors, and play around with a lot of different elements. A lot of, the nature elements along with some of the industrial elements, right? Like some of the buildings around here, some of the homes that you see in the landscape. There's a variety of different textures, feels, and colors that we'll get to play around with tomorrow. Now, something I wanted to talk about when we were talking about how some artists didn't use black. And the reason why most of the artists didn't use black is I will show you. Now, some of you probably experienced this with your own painting if you've painted before and you've used black in your paintings. But what happens sometimes with black paint, and you'll see, is like in general, most blacks that you see in actual environments or whatnot are actually just variations of darker colors, right? So right here, this is like a very dark blue. And if I was to use that dark blue, I would use this dark blue as my black in a lot of ways. But when I put black on it, next to it, notice how really color doesn't touch it. It's sort of a black void in a lot of ways between the two. So a lot of Impressionist artists would tend to go more with the blue, but artists like Matisse, for instance, who did use black in his pieces, right? If we're looking at these, the two women here making music, you see that there is black in there. And, what Matisse is using that black for is he's making an outline for the face, right? He's making a face with the black and treating it almost like it's a cartoon, right? And he's using the side of the brushes, for eyes. He's making a nose, and he's making a mouth. But he's using it to use it as almost, it's unnatural. And this piece is sort of unnatural in a lot of ways. It isn't necessarily exactly the reality of color, and it is not also the reality of form or shape. It's abstract. And what's interesting about Matisse too is that Matisse was an artist that did paint mostly, here's another Matisse here. And if you could see, these probably here, these were very, very dark greens, not black. But, you could see that he was a very traditional in some ways, Impressionist artist. And then as years went on, and he was one of the creators of abstraction and expressionism. And as you can see, he starts using the black outline to figure out form and again, use it in a cartoonish sort of style. So those are the only times I would necessarily use black if we're, going to be painting in the Impressionist style, is to do something that's a little bit more of a, what you would say, latter part, post-impressionistic part of Impressionism, where it starts going into different types of art styles. I think we saw those yesterday. I could just have on the screen. Oops.
Way up there, top.
Top left?
Down, one over from current slide.
Oh,
That right. Click on that.
from the beginning?
Nope, from current slide.
Oh, sorry.
Just click. Left click.
There we go. Well, anyways, let's go back to let's go back to here. This is fine. We'll go back to this here part, to the demonstration. So with the demonstration, you know, let's see, we're talking about blacks. So with the blacks, for instance, if I mix, say, if I mix black with, say, this here, it kind of is interesting. When you put it down, it really flattens the color, if you can see here. It really flattens the color a bit. It makes it gray, and then when you add more color to it, to get the color to pop more, it's a little harder. But when you add, say for instance, the dark blue as a black, which is interesting, all the colors pop. So see, look at this black here, when I have mixed it in with, say this orange, or not this orange, this pink here, and you can see the difference, right? The pinks pop more, and the blue, that is the black, pops more, and it's more vibrant, right? So when you use the blacks, for instance, like if you were to do the Matisse style, again, he's using it as a demonstration, as it's the black of black, right? It's, you know, it's a line, it's, you know, it's a shape. Black is a shape, for instance, in this piece here. So, and like for instance here, he uses black when he's doing the music notes here. And when he's doing these designs, these pattern designs here on the tapestries. All right, so at this point, let's see what time we've got here. 10 minutes. So in the next little bit, I want everyone to really make sure that they have no whites on their canvas or canvas papers, okay? Make sure that there's color on all parts of the paper. Now again, this is Impressionist style, so nothing should be super detailed. Nothing should be extremely rendered. We're only working with color and shape. So again, everything should be really put down all on your pieces. Now tomorrow, you won't be having the opportunity to jump around and do different pieces. We may have some extra canvas paper to work with, but again, we're gonna be working again with a lot of, you know, just one canvas, right? For the entire session tomorrow. So when we are outside, really, really make sure that you are, you know, really getting down the entire landscape. We have a very short period of time tomorrow to get everything in. And so again, tomorrow we're gonna be working with the canvas and the landscape. And in a lot of ways, the landscape is a little bit easier in some ways to rendering something in still life. Sometimes it's a little bit intimidating, right? When you're standing, you know, you have some of these, you know, these figures and these shapes that you might not necessarily have drawn before or worked with. But again, it's all about the Impressionist style, right? Now, if anyone has any pieces that they're done with, if you could bring them up here for me, I would love to maybe show some of the pieces that we have that are currently done. It might inspire someone working on their own piece. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, bring it right up here. Oh, wow, this is great.
It's still a little wet.
It's a little wet, okay. Oh, don't run away. You know what, I'm gonna have you come back because I have no more room up here. But like, take a look here, right here of this piece. And like, look at all this mark making here, this brush work here, where there's almost like a rainbow of different colors right here. And these big splotches of paint right up here. And also to notice this area up here, that there's all these different textures. And we saw this painting before when it wasn't completely finished. So it is interesting to see where we've taken this piece here. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, you can put this right here. Now look at how this piece here, we were talking about laying everything out. This is almost like a Matisse style in a lot of ways too, right? That you have this here, these big blocks of shape, this very, very cute little, it's like a little plush character, right? And we've got, all of this, big, areas of color. But if you look through all the areas of color, we got some greens that are coming in through here. We've got these really great mark making here with the strawberries. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing with me. Thank you. Oh, wow, this is very, very cool. So look at all the mark making here that's going on with this. We've got, now what did you use with this?
I kind of did brush strokes, and then I kind of went over with it with a paper towel.
Oh, very cool. So this artist was telling me that they went in with brushes and then you went in with paper towel. Oh, this is very, very cool effect. But look at this little effect here, this texture that's going on here. And also too, I thought was really, I was noticing what you were doing over there. You were taking elements and bringing them into the piece rather than doing specifically the piece. And so you have all of these flowers here. You've got the tiara here and everything. But look at all these great brush strokes that are going on here. These are great. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. Very cool. Oh, wow. Okay, so look at here. We have almost another Matisse style, but also too, look at these wonderful splatter effect. Now, this is something that we had not discussed a little bit before about the splattering effect, because it is a little bit messy. But if you want to splatter some parts into your painting in the last couple of minutes, that's something you also can do too, to bring a lot of effect to sort of this atmospheric effect to the background too. Look at how nice, you have these here, and this is a little wet still, right? But when it dries, though, you're gonna get these really cool effects. It's almost like, it almost looks like it was rained on a little bit, but in this very, very cool way. This is very, very cool. Oh, this is yours too, right? Here you go. Thank you so much for sharing.
Hi. So I tried to make the Starry Night.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
A lot of details white.
Very.
Kind of a mix of little blue, so you see that kind of dark blue?
Yeah.
It's that mixed with green and yellow.
Oh, very
White
cool.
made it kind of if I painted something, I'd go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I'd paint over it multiple times.
Yeah.
Do splatters of it.
Well, look at this really cool effect. And talking about, we were talking about before about doing something very quickly, right? Yeah. And doing something with all these brush strokes. So notice that this artist here used a lot of, paint on paint, right? Painting on the piece here, right? And you have these blues that pop in, and you've got some of this water effect here that has come here. There's all these kind of fun accidents that are happening here, but also there's a purposeful reason for everything, right? Yeah. So also too, when you're thinking about your piece too, see I would call these fun accidents right here, where the water has dripped down on the paint and has sort of lifted the paint off a little bit, and you've got these kind of cool effects, right? Yeah. And so when you're working on a piece, and definitely tomorrow when we're working on stuff with the landscapes, just think about the fact that everything doesn't have to feel so exact. There's ways in which you can play around with some of the things. Maybe tomorrow, maybe if you were to tomorrow say this was your canvas tomorrow, right? Yeah. And you threw on some water on it, and maybe you went somewhere where it wasn't gonna get on, on the cement or something. It was maybe something like that. And you just took the piece and you sort of went like this, right? Yeah. And you would have an effect on that piece, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
So what I can do tomorrow is I can take blue, that kind of dark blue, that green, that white, and I'll take it with a paintbrush and add it all together and just do this.
Oh yeah, you can definitely do that too, yeah. So there's a lot of techniques that, tonight when you're, thinking about your pieces and what you're thinking about maybe possibly doing, think about like all the techniques that you've learned today, all the things that you learned yesterday, and how you're gonna apply that to your pieces tomorrow, exactly. Well, thank you so very much. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. So let's see. How many more minutes, Margaret, do we have?
We have 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
They can clean up while they're looking at stuff. Or
Yeah, if you're done and you are letting things dry or whatever it may be, you know, take your,
right here, Kevin, if you want to wave your hand, why don't you take this up on the shoulder? Pick it up to share.
oh, Gavin, you got something to show me? Awesome. Oh, wow, okay, great. So this is another version. Like, look at, so when I went over to Gavin, what was really kind of cool was, so Gavin's piece, would you go get your little action figure, Gavin? That'd be great, thank you. And so Gavin's gonna bring up his action figure. And what's really kind of cool is how, even though, and then again, this is kind of like again, there's a lot of Matisse going on today here, which I think is kind of fun, is that Gavin has decided to, even though these pieces look like they're in separate places, it may be the same place. They're sitting on the same plane, but yet they're segmented in different boxes and such. And this is like a clementine, right? Or a little orange.
Yeah, the mandarin is on my table.
Yeah, no worries. We so right here is a mandarin. The way that, you know, we have some little mark making here where you're using a little bit of your pointillistic stuff that you were doing yesterday. And then this character here, my hands are dry. So this character here, what I thought was really cool is I went over to Gavin and I was looking at this piece and like there's this really cool like tie-dye effect on the piece, right? On this little character. And if you notice, Gavin went in and did some parts of it where it's a little bit opaque, it's a little washed, you know, there's a bit of a wash to it too. And so what's really, really, really great about this piece too is that there's a lot of technique here and yet it's very simple at the same time, right? So this is great, thank you, Gavin. Thank you so much for sharing with us. This is a little dry, or a little wet, be careful. But thank you so much for sharing. All right. Is there any other pieces? Yeah? Oh, you have another piece?
So I also made this.
Oh.
So I did all my colors starting from the beginning.
Okay.
I didn't even make that stuff, and I just added it. So in there before was pink, there was green, there was yellow, there was all these things, and I thought maybe if I do this, that'd be pretty
Yeah, it's kind of like a Jackson Pollock effect, kind of, yeah.
exactly.
So what's kind of cool too is like see this mark making here, and what this artist was just explaining too was the fact that they took the, you know, the wetness of the paint, the opaque of the paint, and just, you know, used it onto the paper here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you again for sharing. Okay, great, thank you. Oh, wow, so, okay, so this artist here, look at right here, which is really kind of great, is the amount of texture, the feel of the background. There's a lot of background going around, around this piece. But also too, what's really wonderful too is the sort of texture here with the flowers, right? They've used a lot of paint here, and it's really, really, it feels, you know, like the leaves a little bit. It feels like the flowers, but almost in a sculptural way. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. All right.
Time to start cleaning up and last minute times to share.
Yep, last minute times to share pieces. If you've already shared something, you know, maybe we can hold back and share a little bit more tomorrow. But if you haven't shared a piece yet, come and bring it up. All right. Hey, Margaret, could you share maybe this piece? You don't have to get up here, but we can bring it up here and we can show it. Perfect, Margaret can bring it up to me. Thank you so much. So look at this right here. This artist here really did some, we were talking about how, you utilize all the parts of the piece, right? Making sure that the whole piece has paint on it. And what's really wonderful too is just all the, the way that the characters are laid out here, right? These are the wooden characters right over here and this setup over here. And if you look at the way that the characters are all set up, there's almost as if they are maybe the same size and they're going off into the distance a little bit. What's also fun here is just the way that the tapestry is, the mark making. And also too, I love this part where we have all these horizontal lines here and then how they mimic the wooden characters and the horizontal lines in the characters as well. But notice that the whole page is thought about and that the whole page has almost like, this movement. And yet at the same time, it's, almost blocks of color, right? There's some mixing going on, but there's a lot of blocks of color. And it's kind of, again, like what we were talking about before with Matisse. I think a lot of you really like Matisse. But tomorrow, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. But tomorrow, we're really going to think about is, again, the textures that are outside. And, also, too, we can be looking at, like, the blocks of color of things, and it will be also up to you as the artist, what you want to paint and how you want to paint it.
And speaking of tomorrow, we will meet here first because our outdoor activity is going to be weather dependent. So be prepared to go outside, be prepared to be mobile, and if we're not, we'll figure out something else at that point. So it's time to clean up. Please clean up your space, put away your product, throw away all the pieces, and we will see you tomorrow for our third and final session of the Impressionist Picnic with Bats Langley. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for your work today. Really great stuff. And notice that this is done by the same artist. And look at how they're incorporating that artist representation piece with the landscape they worked on today. And notice like the moodiness of this water here, or the sky. And notice how, that's incorporated in other parts here. And also notice too, like look at that mark making here that's going on between all those pieces. You really see that there's a style going on. Like this artist here, even though they may have studied another artist here, they're incorporating it into these here. Gavin yesterday, I love this piece that Gavin worked on yesterday with the with that piece there. That was a great one. And these right here, this setup here was really wonderful. Especially what I was telling this artist was the fact that what I loved about this was the artist study that they did this here. Really, it seems like it's all done by the same artist. And even though I know that's a Matisse, it's almost as if I feel like the artist that did work off of, that didn't necessarily work off of Matisse. It really felt like it was their own almost.
Perspective's really fun in that one too.
Yeah.
And all three of them are very long. Like all the pieces are long.
But you all did really, really, really fabulous work. So very, very good. Does anyone see anything else in the pieces that people were working on and how they...
Speak up if you have something.
Yeah, speak up.
Wow.
Charlotte, did you have something? No? Okay.
Just stretching, sorry.
What was the hardest thing you had to do?
Yeah, what was the hardest?
Oh, that's a very good question. What's the hardest thing that someone had to work on? Or what was something that was a struggle for someone? And you can be honest, you don't have to be scared. I'll tell you sometimes, I find that, oh, there we go, perfect.
Like, probably making like the water,
Yes,
because like the water's not blue.
no,
Make it blue, but if you want to make it like in like reality,
exactly,
it's all these colors.
yeah.
Like the texture it's actually trying to do.
Exactly. That's a very good point, is that sometimes you'll say to yourself, like you were kind of taught in school that the sky is blue, the sun's yellow, the grass is green, and all those things. But then when you start really looking at color, you start to realize, well, the grass isn't just green, it's a little yellow in there. There's a little blue that's going on in there. The water isn't blue, especially the water over here, it's a little bit more browner. But it's because, the thing is, you look at, all the colors that are out there. I think someone was looking at the wall across the water. Oh, we have some more questions. So I apologize. Your name is Maya. Maya, what was your question?
Making the colors actually.
Yes. Maya said something really great. She was saying that it was really hard making the colors pop a little. It was really interesting. I was talking to Maya earlier, and I was saying to her, sometimes I will use, I think Maya's artwork is over here. This was what Maya was working on today, and this was Maya's still life. And which I think is impressive is, Maya, you actually made your colors pop. But what I think is really interesting is sometimes I'll use a little bit of neon pink. And I know Maya has a shirt that has neon pink in it. And I said to Maya, what you should do is use a little neon pink to pop up your colors when you're painting. So maybe get a tube of neon pink sometime and mix it with your colors, because I do that myself to pop up color sometime. So when you go to the art supply store, and I think, I forgot your name, I'm so sorry. Colette. Colette, you were saying, I think you had a great thing that you said to me today. You said to me, it's really fun and interesting that we have a very limited palette. We don't have all the colors. When you go to an art supply store and you see all the colors on the wall, you want to get all the colors, right? And just use them all. Well, you use a very basic palette and see all the colors that came from just that basic palette. Now, when you go to an art supply store, use your basic colors that you have, but maybe look at that wall and say, I want to pick up some different colors into the pieces, right? Or my paintings. And I might want to, add, this color to my palette or that color. Maybe I want to use some neon colors into my pieces. So, definitely try to, if you want to continue painting more and whatnot, go to the art supply store and look at it as if it is a library, right? And you're checking out a book, right? And you see colors on the wall and say to yourself, I want to add some of that color into that piece, or maybe I want to use this paintbrush because maybe you want to get a fan brush or something like that, because it might make a certain, texture, or make a certain mark on the painting. So, go to, the art supply store and look at all the things that are in front of you and see, what you can do. Now, Aura, did you have a question? No? You got a question back there? Yep. The time limit. So here's something that I always say. We had time limits, right? Because we have a structure with the class and everything, right? So with the time limits, try to make some time limits for yourself too, because sometimes you'll notice that, for me, for instance, I sometimes work a little slow when I'm painting sometimes. I get a little too slow, and I realize sometimes I'll look back at a painting and be like, oh wow, this painting is very boring, or it doesn't have a lot of life to it sometimes. So sometimes I will put a time limit onto myself and say, all right, I'm gonna do this part of this painting it's gonna be 5 minutes. I'm only gonna work on this for 5 minutes, or I'm gonna work on this for 10 minutes. And what I do is I find that it sort of makes the things exactly that I want in my paintings, right? I'll say to myself, okay, those marks have a lot of life to them now. You know, they look quick and they look like they have some life to them instead of being laborious. Like sometimes you'll look at a painting and sometimes you're like, ooh, that looks a little laborious. It looks like they overworked something sometimes. So, you know, definitely play around with your time limits with paintings. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, sometimes you may get exactly what you need done in those 5 minutes, but then you may be done with 5 minutes and say to yourself, I might need 3 more minutes. And then you get to that. Oh yeah, okay, we don't have no more minutes, so. All right, everyone, give yourselves a round of applause. Did a great job. Great work today.